we move from one shield onto the next, and that is Yitzchak Rabin. Today marks the 20th anniversary of one of the most dramatic events in Israel's history, the assassination of former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzchak Rabin. Though Rabin's murder induced a wave of shock and grief that arguably still veils the Israeli conscience, Rabin's assassin, Yigal Amir, at the time only 25 years old, remained impervious to the anguish he caused both Rabin's family and the entire country. Author Dan Efron writes in his book, Killing a King, that during Amir's interrogation, he had the audacity to ask the police for a drink so he could toast the former prime minister's death. Rabin's assassination took place at a very deliberate time in Israeli history. As Efron writes, Rabin had already produced 2 accords with the Palestinians, creating a momentum that made a final peace agreement feel almost inevitable, however difficult and complicated. Perhaps Rabin's most memorable line during the Oslo Accords was, "We say to you today in a loud and clear voice, enough of blood and tears, enough." Efron notes, however, that Rabin's involvement in a potential peace process also triggered a violent backlash by both Palestinians and Israelis opposed to the conciliation process. Despite Rabin's Herculean efforts to create peace between Israel and its surrounding countries, Rabin had to undergo his own evolution of thinking towards Israel's enemies. He spent his entire life fighting for Israel's right to exist. As a teenager, Rabin joined the Palmach, the elite division of the Haganah, an underground army in Palestine during the British Mandate. In the 1940s, Rabin served as a military leader in the Arab-Israeli War. In the 1960s, Rabin was chief of staff for Israel's newly formed IDF, Israel Defense Forces, during the Six-Day War. An article in The Guardian states, Rabin was no dove. In 1988, when Rabin was the Minister of Defense, he supposedly ordered Israeli troops to put down the First Intifada by breaking the bones of stone-throwing Palestinian protesters. Ultimately, however, the Intifada convinced Rabin that war and violence were unsustainable. Although Rabin mistrusted Yasser Arafat, the former chairman of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the two of them engaged in dialogue, and the outcome was promising. Arafat and the PLO would recognize Israel's right to exist. Israel would withdraw from the Gaza Strip and 7 cities in the West Bank, and the Palestinians have an elected parliament. All until terrorist groups engaged in an unprecedented wave of attacks, and right-wing Israelis carried out their campaign of animosity as well. I don't share all of this to claim any awareness of a resolution of the continuing strife in the state of Israel, nor can I confirm that if Rabin had survived, peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians would have been successful or inevitable. However, on this weekend, the yahrzeit of Rabin's death, coupled with this week's Parashat Lech, I do claim that we have been bequeathed with much wisdom to consider as we face our own upcoming elections and our own battles of dialogue or lack thereof. I'm going to be honest, I feel like a broken record. This is not the first of our Torah I have given in general or even here at WRT about the importance of conversation. But then again, I'm impelled by Rav Ben Bagbag's Talmudic injunction to turn a topic over and over, because rarely are essential lessons derived from visiting a topic just once. Rabin and Israel's former Prime Minister Shimon Peres were awarded the 1944 Nobel Peace Prize, not for achieving a solution, but rather for their, quote, efforts to engage in negotiation, for merely trying to discuss the prospect of peace. Over the past few years, citizens of the United States, ourselves included, have had to confront the increasing uncertainty of our democracy, our ability to each have a voice, to use our voices, to be in conversation as a population, even if we struggle to find common ground. But more and more, we, and I include myself, we fail to embrace or even undertake such conversations as we shy away from sharing our opinions with others or from tolerating opposing arguments. I don't mean to suggest that all arguments are true or righteous, but we cannot turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to the reality that our inability to be in dialogue isolates us into bubbles of thought and prevents any potential positive cross-pollination of ideas and, more importantly, ideals. More and more, I hear young students and adults alike refrain from participating in any conversations labeled too difficult, too derisive, too unlikely to result in an outcome of which we approve. But is withholding ourselves from any possibility of engagement better? To avoid any form of communication out of fearing we will not be heard or validated? As a rabbi, I wonder if I'm heard with every drash, sermon, devar Torah that I give. Are people really listening? A wise teacher of mine reminded me that even when it seems like no one is paying attention, the thoughts I share are always seeping into people's conscience, and I can never predict the impact that will have. I want to assure each of you that your voices, your opinions, have the same lingering power to create reverberating echoes of impact. For those of us who are wondering, okay then, how do I engage in such purposeful dialogue? Luckily for us, this week's Parashat Lech offers us some sage advice. At the beginning of Parsha, Abraham journeys with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. Torah teaches that both Abraham and Lot had amassed much wealth, which they each brought along on their travels. According to the Torah, when Abraham and Lot arrive in Bethel, the land cannot bear them, should they settle there together, for their possessions are too plentiful. As a result of this bounty, the herders in each camp begin to quarrel. To avoid escalating tension, Abraham and Lot work out a deal that suits them both. Abraham offers us, like Rabin, an example of approaching conflict rather than avoiding it altogether. From this encounter with Lot, we learn 3 valuable lessons. First, Abraham and Lot directly confront their problem. Second, the value of our relationships outweigh the value of our possessions. Abraham is willing to compromise for the sake of peace. Abraham assures Lot there is enough land to support them both, even if it is not in the area of Bethel as they originally imagined. And third, to resolve conflict, our focus should not be on the self, but rather on the greater good of the collective. When Abraham is told to Lech Lecha, Rashi argues this means to go from oneself, perhaps to create space to hear and see others. Parashat Lech contains Abraham's first physical and metaphorical steps into covenant with God and with community. Both Abraham and Yitzchak Rabin understood that sustaining a unified whole, either with family, with God, with community, requires a journey of conversation rather than a specific outcome serving only one set of participants. In the Jewish tradition, it is customary to offer someone a blessing when they embark upon a trip. So I want to offer us a Tefillat HaDerech, a traveler's prayer for our metaphorical journey of conversation. On the eve of our primary elections, Israel's elections, the general state in which we find ourselves, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu. May it be your will, Adonai, our God, that you lead us, our entire country and our community, toward peace. Guide our footsteps toward dialogue rather than away from it. Help us reach goals along the way in which our relationships and unification matter more than our individual desires. May you rescue us from greed, from isolation, from violence, and from the boundaries that prevent open and respectful communication. May you send blessings in the form of democracy. May you grant us grace, kindness, and mercy in the eyes of those who both share our beliefs and in the eyes of those whom disagree. Blessed are you, our God, our rock, and our Redeemer, who charges us to Lech, to move forward with faith in the face of uncertainty.